Uncensored, no holds barred talk. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is Global Reality Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of the Global Reality right here on the Global Reality Radio Network. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Thank you for being with us today for this April 20th, 2011 broadcast. We have a special edition of the show for you here tonight, and we're just so glad you all could be with us. And we had this show originally scheduled for Monday, and we had to reschedule it for today, and that's fine because we have a big guest for you here tonight. We don't bring guests up all the time here on the Global Reality, but I like to bring on quality guests instead of, quantity guests. Some people have guests all the time. I really don't have guests all the time. I just have ones that I have been lucky enough to interview a lot of very big names when it comes to this. Almost everybody I've ever wanted to interview, I've been lucky enough to do that. And our guest night falls in that category for me as well. We've been reading his book here on air, and I know you guys as well as I have had it just seems to tie all the ends together. A lot of the information, we've talked through, we've heard about or known about, but it really ties everything together, and especially in light of some of the research that I've done into groups like the Jesuit Order and the Council for National Policy and the rest of that. So tonight it is my very, very distinct pleasure to welcome to the broadcast researcher and author William Bramley. We had William Henry on a couple of weeks ago, so William Bramley here with us tonight. Bill, thanks for coming to the broadcast. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm honored to be on your show. Thanks for your interest in the book.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know you've done more than that since that book was released in the early 90s, but we'll definitely want to talk about some of that tonight as well. But for people who may not be familiar with your work, tell people about how you got involved in doing research and writing. I know you came about this through in the same way many people, I think, did, trying to figure out the origins of war, why we're told that humans have to have war and that it's something that we're innately born into. Just give people an idea how you were drawn into the research and where it took you.
Well, it probably all started back in high school. I took a class in sociology, and that really turned my life around. Here was the idea that there are certain group dynamics that affect society, that affect individual behavior. And so as a result, when I went off to college, I became a sociology major. And I had a lot of friends. We were all these types who were into political science and sociology and philosophy, and we just loved talking about it and taking classes in it and rapping about it, what's the meaning of life and why is there war and all of that. And this was back like in the early 1970s, which were really part of the 60s still. The 60s didn't really end until about 73. And so I was very, very influenced by that. And so it was really that education that got me going. And so I just, started exploring different things. I knew a guy who did the original research on the Robert Kennedy assassination. He was the one who uncovered the second gun evidence. And so I'd read Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment. So that kind of introduced me a little bit to conspiracy theory, the idea that these politically significant things can happen, and sometimes behind it there's evidence of more than just one guy doing something, that there could be kind of a cabal behind some of these things. And some of the evidence was pretty good. So that kind of got me going down that line. I also read, at that time, what was it, the Eric von Daniken book was still popular then. Now, I didn't really get interested in UFOs, even though I read Eric von Daniken and, kind of looked down some other paths. I didn't really get that interested in UFOs. I kind of thought, like most people, well, they're just sort of out there. They're kind of buzzing around. They don't want to get too close because we're kind of warlike and they don't want to be attacked, but they're curious and they sometimes do experiments on people. And I thought, well, even if that's true, yeah, kind of interesting, but that doesn't really solve the problems we have. I think we have to kind of look earthward. And that was really my orientation. But then it was probably a good 10 years after I got into college that I finally decided to really do a real research project on this. Okay, what can we do about war? What can we talk about it? And then I started following down a couple of paths. I started looking into the profit motive. Who profits from this? The obvious people are the armaments manufacturers. They make a lot of money. The lenders who loan money to governments to buy the arms to fight the wars. So you have certain people who profit. Then you have, and that kind of led to reading Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote about how princes during his time would they would conquer a region, and then they would set up little factions that kind of secretly go in there and have their little agent provocateurs kind of start these little groups to fight each other. And the reason for that is you get a political advantage in that the people become too weakened to fight the real oppressor, the real occupier, because they're so involved in squabbling amongst themselves. So it's been an actual documented political tool. So those are the three motives that you kind of find that are a little bit more behind the scenes, but that play a big role in a lot of warfare. Well,
I want to add, Mr. Bramley, that I found that when I was reading that chapter in your book, I found that through my research, I found these different groups like the Council for National Policy, a secretive right-wing group that's connected to the Jesuit Order and the Knights of Malta and all these different things, and I started seeing these connections where they're doing the same thing today. They set up these different groups that you have the Tea Party or you have whatever have you, and they set up these divide and conquer groups and they get people to pick a side. So ultimately, it's average everyday citizens on the right wing over here fighting against average everyday citizens on the left wing over here. And instead of going and finding out who the enslavers are, we're fighting with each other. So they're doing that still to this day, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it absolutely looks that way because you really look at, you sometimes find what you look for is you're looking for the common personalities, the ones that kind of flit between the groups. You find the same person. I have to be honest with you, since doing the Gods of Eden, I haven't done a lot of active research.
I understand. You weren't originally a researcher. This was just something you did on the side, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it took a lot of time though. It was no light project, I'll tell you that.
No.
And a lot of people have kind of followed a little bit in along these same tracks, which is great. I'm so happy to see other people out there doing this research, so I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, what happened was though that I got. But I still couldn't understand. Well, why do individuals fight? Who have no benefit from this. You take some young guy who's 20 years old and you throw a gun on him, and what does he have to gain? I mean, the only thing he has to gain is he's going to get killed. I mean, in some countries like the United States, okay, they try to maybe provide a college education, they get a roof over their head or something. But, who's really going to go out there and risk their life just for that? In other words, there's more for the bread and butter fighters, the guys who actually do the actual fighting and actually pick up the guns. There really is very seldom a profit motive, and what you find is they get stimulated by ideology. It could be like intense nationalism. Religion is a big player in this. And so I started looking at that. Well, okay, what are these ideologies that get people to actually pick up the gun and start shooting? And I happened to decide to go down the religion track, because that's the one we look at a lot.
Yes.
Okay, and there's a certain kind of religion that really seems to trigger this in people. It tends to be this apocalyptic, kind of radical, we are chosen by God and you're not kind of religion. Okay, and I thought, well, that's interesting, and this kind of goes back in time. Well, where did those religions come from? And most sociologists and historians, they look at, it's just the priest class, They get a little power for themselves. They go out and do that. But what you keep finding, like in the Bible and even in the Quran and in the Old Testament, you keep finding these reports, the people who kind of came out with these ideas like, hey, we need, these apocalyptic ideas. They claim, oh, I was approached by this angel, or, this flying thing came down and gave me this message.
Yeah.
Okay. And, now most historians look at that as being myth. It's just a lot of myth and so forth. But then that's when I started thinking, okay, well, now we're starting to get into, Eric von Daniken possibly. Because now we're talking about, there's a theory that these are ancient astronauts. And what that opens the door to, and then when you get into Zecharia Sitchin, I think probably he was the biggest influence, I think, on my book of anybody, was his work and basically his translations of the old Sumerian tablets talking about the creation stories. And it's just amazing how much of that stuff there is, where they actually talk about in those tablets how, these human-like gods came down and they were the seeders of humanity, so to speak, or at least did a genetic engineering to create the modern form of Homo sapiens. They really talk about how they set up these organizations and they set up a system whereby they had the technology or the ability to keep people fighting. They actually reported that as a tool that they were using way back then. And I thought, well, that's kind of what the Tower of Babel story is about. We can get into that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, going back to all of that, I thought, oh my God, okay, then and there were certain characteristics that these organizations had through which they were injecting these divisive philosophies. They tend to be kind of secretive, they tended to be kind of apocalyptic, they claim to have all of this spiritual knowledge, but hey, we're going to hide it from everybody else, and only the select few can have this knowledge, and that whole process. And then you look at how these organizations then have progressed up through history, and I almost couldn't believe it. It's like these same types of organizations have kept going, and you keep finding points in history all the way up to the modern day where people who belong to some of these types of organizations that promote divisiveness in some way continue to report contacts from either some kind of extraterrestrial or heavenly being as being the source of where they get their inspiration and ideas. And that's how the Gods of Eden really came about when I finally kind of went back and then came forward again looking at these common patterns. And that's when the theory of the Gods of Eden then developed. And I have to say, I almost did not put UFOs in there. Because I thought it was really, really outlandish. I mean, yeah, I had been exposed to some ideas and philosophies about UFOs and things like that, but I'll say even then, my concern was how do you prevent war? What do you do with human beings to get them to stop picking up guns? Something that involves their free will.
What's interesting to me, Mr. Bramley, is that was the only chapter in the book I thought so far that I read that just seemed like it. I could have done without it. You know what I mean?
Okay, sure.
I mean, everything. No, just to me, you had the evidence and everything else was there, and it was just like, I saw why you did that, though. I mean, for the benefit of people who have never read that kind of stuff or aren't familiar with it, it was good. But everything else. I mean, you had all of the good info and everything else there, and I think that's what's important when people read the book. I mean, you really do tie together.
Yeah, I understand the book came out
ends.
about 20 years ago.
Yeah. Way ahead of its time.
It was one of the first books that really kind of, I think, got into depth on some of this. I mean, Charles Fort, back in 1919, he wrote the Book of the Damned, and I think he had the best and most succinct explanation. It was just like within a couple of paragraphs, I think he sort of formalized it very well, that we are property, that there's some kind of extraterrestrial race that's kind of out there, we belong to them, and through their secret machinations, they're somehow influencing the Earth. And I mean, this was before the modern UFO era, and he wrote that. And so I quote him in the beginning of the book, as that was also a big influence reading that. But yeah, so it was really hard, and I felt like because of sort of my position, and I try to be a little bit rational. Of course, some people are going to say I'm not, having written a book like this. But I want it to be based on some evidence or on some logical patterns here. And so, like I said, I almost did not want to put the UFOs in there because I'll tell you, the whole UFO field is so goofy and so crazy.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it's so hard to deal with it. And a lot of people ask me, well, how come you didn't get more involved after you wrote The Gods of Eden? And, because I never really, kind of really got involved so-called in the UFO field that much. I'd give talks if I was invited like I am today. Sure, I'd go ahead and be happy to talk about it, but I didn't really make an effort to kind of put myself out there. and part of the reason was it's just so hard to deal with it, and it's so goofy. But that's part of it, It's like you have to accept that as part of the phenomenon. I think the phenomenon is very real, and you just have to sort of deal with the fact that there's also this layer of goofiness on top of it, which I think hides something very real and very serious. And trying to penetrate through that is not that easy all the time. So anyway, that became the challenge. I'm sure you faced that challenge too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what they've always done. I think you're exactly right. I think they've always put out this sort of goofy sci-fi sort of front for all this stuff when it's really much deeper than that. They put out things with where people talk about shape-shifting reptiles and all this different stuff. But when you really look at it, you look into some of their symbology. There is reptile symbology everywhere else. So I think, as you were mentioning earlier, it's the context. We have the ancient texts and we have all this stuff. I think more and more the reason that there has been these, you had the invasion of the Iraq National Museum in Baghdad during the invasion in 2003 when all the ancient Sumerian cylinder seals and whatnot were taken, all these ancient artifacts, little reptilian statues. They took all of that stuff. And you have to imagine that now that since the time of when your book was released in the early 90s, technology has progressed to a point now where some of these things that were written in the time of Sitchin have a lot more context than they did then. We know what this stuff is now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the UFO theory and the ancient astronaut theory, I think, puts a light on things that we never had before. There were people talking about aliens all the way back before the so-called modern era, before 1947. Even the founding fathers of the United States had some of them anyway, had some kind of idea of the other worlds, that there could be life elsewhere. So it's not an entirely new idea, but putting these particular legends, like the Sumerian legends, the Egyptian stories, the Egyptian depictions, I think we can put them in a more accurate light, because what a lot of people don't know is that you have, well, probably your audience knows it, but maybe the world at large, not as much. You have these depictions of things that look like the gray aliens of today, especially and it's rather amazing. But now we can kind of identify them a little bit better than we could back then, or even up until the UFO era. Now we kind of have so many reports, we have so much data now about the modern manifestations of them, that now I think we can put them in a more accurate light and understand them, I think, a little bit more accurately. So you're absolutely right, is that we've come a long way. And I think in a way that makes this all very exciting, in that we can give them, I think, a more accurate context and probably understand, therefore, human history a little bit better. Unfortunately, what comes up, though, is not always that pleasant. It's not always that fun. I'd rather believe in, benign space aliens, the Space Brothers who are here to help us along and gently guide us to our spiritual destiny. I don't know. Maybe there are a few.
I just think that's how you know you're on the right track of research, is when you're coming from the standpoint of not wanting to believe something, where you're doing everything you can to try and find what your discoveries are to be false, and you can't. You continue to find that they're true, and there's more evidence that comes. And I kind of feel that was maybe something you experienced when you were writing The Gods of Eden. Yeah,
I did. Yeah, I got exposed to a lot of these different ideas, and even after that exposure, I still felt like, I don't know. And I'm serious about this, because I still kind of was on the fence. Well, maybe UFOs really are just swamp gas and all of that kind of stuff, And so I was really going to write The Gods of Eden and do something totally different. I was just going to write about war profiteering. That was really my book. That was going to be about more war profiteering. I was going to talk a lot more about, and my proposal would be to deprofitize war, just make laws that, companies that make warplanes and all of that, they cannot be for-profit companies. Not that they're charitable by any means, but they can't sell stock. Nobody can make a profit from them. And if you take away that profit motive, then maybe there's less incentive then to get people all instigated to fight war. So that was part of it, But what convinced me about the UFO, and I think the reason why I included it in there, was when I looked at these different religious groups. I was looking at the Protestant Reformation, and right before them we had the Black Death. And the Black Death was actually a period when you had kind of these weird mystical groups, one group in particular called Friends of God. And then I got curious. I thought, well, okay, here we have this great apocalyptic event with with people dying in huge quantities, a tragic event. And then I found one little book. It was just on a library shelf in a library, and it had all of these UFO reports from the Black Death. I mean, people were calling them comets and things, but the way they behaved was like a UFO, and they said, oh, they were spraying these mists and these gases.
Yeah, you had guys in in suits in villages, and every time that these guys would appear, there would be mass deaths out of that. Isn't that correct?
Exactly, that was part of it,
yeah.
and they were basically the first men in black, because they were often reported in black garb. So you put all that together, and my jaw, I swear, I sat in that library, and here are all these other students just kind of walking around, and here I had this mind-bending experience as I was sitting there with this book that nobody checks out or nobody looks at, And there are probably a lot of books like that out there, by the way, in libraries. If it's not all on the internet yet,
no.
Hopefully it'll all get there. But anyway. But that, I just couldn't ignore that anymore. It's like, okay, I just can't ignore these reports anymore. And that's really what crossed the line. Then I said, okay, this book is now going to be about UFOs. I mean, that's where the evidence led. I just can't brush aside and kind of repress this information from the Black Death era. I mean, I feel like I'd be doing a disservice if I did that. And that became the book. Yeah, so it's been quite a wild ride since then. It's been very provocative talking to people, and it's been very interesting to see where, like I said, I don't actively research it anymore. But yeah, if I see something on the internet or I see a book, I'll go buy it, I'll read it, and try to keep up with it at least a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that's very still very interesting that you went through the experience of researching this, and I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in as well, because the fact that this is just something that you decided to do because it sort of felt like it was the right thing to do, and so that's why you did it. And of course, it didn't become your life, and you've gone on to do other things. But the fact that you actually did take that moment to do that, I think, is inspiring, at least to me, and I know a lot of our listeners. But what you were talking about there in the last segment with the Black Death, and I was sort of interested in how it talked about how they would use fleas and they would use all this stuff to attack the pet population, and we see these depopulation agendas being played out today through war and through things that they're spraying in the air and food and water and the rest of this and natural disasters. So I see a direct line from the beginning of when we had civilizations first start to arise out of nothing in Mesopotamia to now with the same people, these custodial masters, the progeny of the custodial masters still running the game through the bloodlines today and still engaging in warfare. And I think that this type of information probably was relegated to the fringe a lot more in the 1990s when you first wrote this, because of people could just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter with the rest of the things that he said in the book that are correct because it's just UFOlogy and all this stuff. I really see that a lot of people have tried to marginalize your information because I think they're scared of it.
Yeah, it's gone a little bit more mainstream. I won't say it's mainstream by any means, but, the History Channel's asked me to be on a couple of their Ancient Alien shows and so forth.
Wow.
So, yeah, so it's gotten out there, and a little bit. Some people think that History Channel's silly to do the series, but apparently it's a very highly rated series. A lot of people watch it. So it's gotten a little bit, like I said, a little bit more mainstream. It certainly is not a mainstream idea, but it's getting out there. And I think, other people are kind of putting out information that they've uncovered or the beliefs that they have, and that's getting put out there. So I think altogether, all of it needs to be analyzed. Not every idea that everybody puts out or every piece of information that everybody puts out is necessarily accurate. Some is, some isn't. And I'm sure some things in Gods of Eden will prove to, not necessarily be totally on spot, but hopefully some will, but the theory basically is holding up, and that's what really surprised me. The book first got published in 1989, and then the Berlin Wall was just coming down. This whole Cold War was basically ending, and people were saying to me, and I was thinking, well, okay, this may disprove the Gods of Eden. It's like, because I wrote about that faction. That's kind of when the book ends. It's like with the Cold War. And okay, maybe it's no longer true, or maybe the theory was wrong all along. But I was noticing that there were these little skirmishes, these little fights going on involving Islamic radicals. It wasn't as big as it was today, but it was just kind of getting started. And I gave a talk, and I kind of made a prediction. I'm not proud of this prediction, but I said that if the theory of the gods of Eden is true, and it hasn't changed, if the end of the Cold War and the coming down of the Berlin Wall is not a change, all it is a shift. We're simply going to, because that's what happens in history. You find this, one faction comes, it eventually goes, and another faction rises up to replace it.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, I said, okay, if the gods of Eden is true, and if it hasn't changed, probably radical Islam is going to be the next faction that's going to be used to foment a lot of fear and war. Unfortunately, that seems to have come true. But, all sides to these battles, of course, are complicit. It's not just radical Islam. Of course, it's also radical Christianity, radical Judaism. All of these more radical elements of these religions, of course, are the fomenters. It takes two to tango is what I'm trying to say. But that did happen. And the Islam basically replaced the communist bloc as the next faction that we all have to do battle with each other.
And that's exactly what Dr. Wernher von Braun had predicted in the final days of his life in the 1970s when he was dying of cancer. And he was just telling his secretary that, first it was going to be first it was going to be communism, then it was going to be third world crazy terrorists, and then a threat, then a threat from asteroids. And then what the final card was going to be that they were going to tell people that there were hostile aliens, when in fact these were aliens that may have been coming to try and end war and the rest of this stuff. So very interesting predictions there by Wernher von Braun. But we've been going here about 30 minutes, Mr. Bramley, so we're going to take a break for about 8 minutes, and we're going to come back and we'll continue and do another half hour. Our guest tonight is William Bramley. His book, The Gods of Eden, and we've been reading it here on the broadcast. Definitely you can buy that at Amazon.com. We're going to take a break, come back, and have more with our guests. All right, back here with you on the Global Reality, right here on the Global Reality Radio Network. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Thank you for being with us here tonight for a special edition of the show. We have author and researcher William Bramley on the broadcast with us here tonight, author of The Gods of Eden, which we've been reading here on the subsequent shows over the past few months. And it's just been, got such a great response from that. So we're really glad to have Mr. Bramley on with us here tonight. And you can definitely find his books, The Gods of Eden, at Amazon.com and other places like that. So a lot of people are asking if they could get copies and where to find them at. I would go to Amazon.com. Also, if you have questions for Mr. Bramley tonight, you can email me, globalrealityshow@gmail.com. That's globalrealityshow@gmail.com. I'll do my best to get your questions asked on air here tonight. I'd like to continue on with Mr. Bramley, if I could. I wanted to ask you what you thought about, or actually more appropriately, what your reaction over the past, couple of decades here since you originally wrote the book, the things that we've seen play out on the world stage, things from the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, 9/11, the financial collapse. The things that have occurred in the time since you researched and have written this book had to have been just mind-blowing for you. And as you talked about predicting what the next threat was going to be, these things had to have been real affirmations of your research, Mr. Bramley.
Yeah, unfortunately they have, because the sources of all of these conflicts are ultimately the same as the kind of sources I talk about in The Gods of Eden. For example, I talk about the inflatable money system, which actually arose out of these obscure origins that seem to trace to these weird secret societies. And now that's what we're dealing with today. And so it seems like one of the purposes or one of the objectives of this whole machination is just to keep people toiling. It's just to keep people struggling all the time, just for their physical existence, just to kind of keep food in their mouths and do all of that. That seems to be part of it, because what that does is it gives you less time then to really think about spiritual questions, to kind of think about the bigger issues. If you're worried about where your next meal is going to come from, or if your house is about to foreclose, that's where your focus is going to be. And I think it actually promotes a less spiritual life. Now, some people will say, no, in some ways the adversity maybe makes some people more spiritual, and that's good if it does. If they can use it constructively like that, that's good. But for most people it doesn't, and I don't think that's the purpose of it. I really think the purpose of it is to basically keep people worried and concerned at the level of being a Homo sapien as opposed to the evidence that we are basically a consciousness, you could call it a soul or a spiritual being. And that is part of the oppression, kind of keeping that sort of clouded, keeping that goofy. Just like there's this layer of goofiness that's put over the UFO phenomenon, there's also a layer of goofiness that's put over this whole idea of, survival and spirituality. And again, that boils down to these old creation stories involving the ancient gods. Part of what they talked about was keeping people ignorant, breathing the veil of ignorance over them about those kinds of things. And so this type of struggle, war, financial struggle, hunger, all of that, it keeps us all at that level still. And so it's interesting that the mechanisms that cause this, what I call the inflatable money system, war, of course, all seem to trace back to these types of groups. And so we see that happening today. Yeah, there are a couple of other things, and these are just sort of a couple of random things that I've seen. Again, not any in-depth research, and I welcome anybody listening to please go out and do it. If I inspire you to go out and kind of research some of these paths, please do, because I by no means have all of the evidence or everything there. But
nobody does.
Yeah, I know, and so that makes it a challenge. But for example, Mexico, Mexico had this big UFO wave.
Right.
Jamie Mousen down there on Mexican TV, he did a great job of covering some of it. Some of it was fake. What happens with UFO flaps is that you get a flap where a lot of people are reporting them, and they seem to be legitimate. But when these happen, you also get people who then start jumping on the bandwagon, and they go out making their own fakes. And so you kind of get this mishmash, and it can often be very difficult to sort out the true from the original. So don't be discouraged. I tell people, don't get discouraged that there are fakes from that time, but there are also a lot of real reports that are corroborated from different sources, from different points of view, seeing the same UFO, and some of the videos look fake, some look real. But the prediction there that I made, Mexico is going to be in a lot of trouble soon. Okay? Again, we have this idea that as soon as you get a lot of UFO involvement somewhere, there's going to be problems. There's going to be strife. There's going to be a lot of problems. And what happened now, of course, is now we've got practically a civil war going on in Mexico between the drug barons and the government down there, which is spilling over not too much into this country, but I hope it stays contained down there. But and again, I haven't really researched it. You'd want to look at, okay, now some of these drug lords down there, do they have apocalyptic beliefs? Do they have, are they or somebody kind of connected to them claiming this kind of connection? And I did read that there's one big drug lord who apparently is a very apocalyptic Christian.
Well,
I haven't
Mr.
made
one of the cartels. There's a name for it. I can't remember the exact name for it, but one of my listeners had brought this to my attention a couple of months ago. There is and it's actually a Mexican secret society that Bill Richardson, the governor of New Mexico, is a part of, and they're involved heavily with the Catholics, with the Jesuits, with the drug cartels. So, I mean, there definitely is some evidence there to support that.
Yeah, okay. And, and you can predict it. And then what you want to look for, and again, I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean it's not there because I haven't really looked. You're going to find out, do any of them claim right now that they have contact with any kind of angelic beings, any kind of UFOs? Do any of them claim that? And once you find somebody that claims that, that's the group you want to look at, and you want to see where those connections go. And, of course, the drug gangs around the world, they often operate as secret societies. They have their own kind of minor rituals. The mafia started basically as a Masonic. It was started by a Freemason long ago. And so you find these kind of origins even in the criminal families. And by the way, I'm not saying that the Masons are criminals, by the way. They're controversial still. I've known a couple of American Freemasons. I don't see as much threat. I think that sort of one faction sort of died down, at least in this country. Now, some of the European Freemasons, I kind of wonder still about.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that 100% because it's always been a thing in especially in Britain where you don't work in any sort of high influence unless you are a Mason.
Yeah. So I think it's more influential over there. Factions come and go. They'll be significant in terms of what I talk about, but then they sort of die out, and then they just become a club for old men, I think that's partially what's happened here in the United States with Freemasonry, but again, Europe, I think, there's enough there to make you wonder. But then again, you find the origins of even criminal gangs. Some of them, at least, you find origins in these groups, and then they become factions that cause more strife. Drugs and the violence surrounding them, of course, is another source of strife that keeps us worried about our existence as human beings. And so we're just sort of bombarded with this all the time, constantly, from cradle to grave. We're just bombarded with it. And ultimately, it's very artificial. If you really look at the origins of problems and the problems that bother us, like the financial system, the problem of war, these problems, from a really technical point of view, they're really, really easy to fix. It's like you can very, very easily solve.
Sure.
Really, from a technical point of view. But actually getting it changed, that's tough, because now you're dealing with people's motivations. You're dealing with power structures. That's what's hard. And that's what makes the change hard. Not the fact that, the financial problems are sort of this inevitable product of, what we do. We're sort of presented to us this way. Well, we spend too much, we do this and do that.
But it's designed that way. It's designed to fail.
It is. It's designed to keep collapsing. And to blow up and to expand, collapse, because again, it seems to be okay. Well, that's part of the system. People maybe don't read anything sinister into that. They just say, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the way money is. On the other hand, tracing it, I see it linked to this fact that people now have to struggle again. Like people, they were secure in their mortgages. They were secure in their homes. They didn't have to worry about the price of gas too much. And now all of a sudden that's gone away for a lot of people, but that seems to be the program, to always inject that anxiety, and that's just one of the tools for doing that. And then that keeps us struggling. That keeps us pointing fingers at each other. Oh, it's them. And of course, we're always pointing it at two other human beings. Oh, it's those homeowners who took out too big a loan, or it's we're making scapegoats of each other. When in fact, some of the scapegoats are.
Do we lose William Bramley? Let's see here. This is very odd. Try to get him back. All right, so strange that it does this only when we have guests on. You guys notice this is the exact same thing that's happened during William Henry interview. Now we got Bramley on, and it's doing it again. Very strange stuff. It always seems to happen. This has always happened ever since I've been doing shows. It only seems to happen whenever I have guests on. And just about everybody I've ever interviewed, this has happened with, and it's mind blowing. So let's see if we can get him reconnected here. Give me just a minute to get everything back up. A good interview so far. I want to see I hope I couldn't remember what the last thing he said was. Hopefully he'll be able to remember and pick up from there. Oh man, this is such a pain. Let's see.
Hello?
Hi, Bill, you back with us?
Yeah, it looks like we had a glitch. It got cut off.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it seems to happen every time. But okay, we're back here, ladies and gentlemen, back here with our guest, William Bramley. I wanted you to pick up where you left off there, if you can remember, because you were sort of on a good spot.
Yeah, I think I pretty much finished my thought on that. Like I said, you have what I call the king rat layer. These are the human beings who profit from all of this, who benefit from it in a very tangible way. They make the profits to do all that. They obviously have an economic incentive to keep this going. But then you look at the bigger picture, the historical picture, there seems to be one more layer, one more onion layer to peel back, and that's where you find kind of a broader agenda to basically keep people oppressed, anxious, and fighting along the lines of a Machiavellian model. And I do theorize that the financial problems we have today, because they originate from these same kinds of institutions, are ultimately part of that, and at least they have arisen out of that.
Well, yeah, I wanted to say, while I had you on here, in case you're not very familiar with what I do, I'm sort of outside of the what you would call the conspiracy research or the truth community or whatever it may be. patriot movement thing. I'm way outside of that, and have all pretty much always been since I started on radio, and it's been because I've talked about these issues and topics that you discuss, Mr. Bramley, in your book, The Gods of Eden, and as you were talking about earlier, it's amazing now to see some of these things that I was laughed about just a few years ago. Now, as you mentioned, being put on the History Channel and the rest of this stuff, and I'd always seen people sort of shying away from this type of information and almost being told by the leaders that they followed of their communities, of the truth communities and whatnot, don't look into the extraterrestrial stuff, or don't look into the Sumerian stuff. Focus on the bankers and focus on, the Jews or anything over here, but don't look at religion, and don't look at the priest class and the Jesuits and all the rest of this stuff. And so I've found more and more as I've been reading your book that it really explains why that is, because these factions that people I think are latching on or are believing or telling them the truth are really another layer for this divide and conquer system, this, the Hegelian dialectic, and also keeping us, as you mentioned, bickering over, whether or not this happened to the World Trade Center or that. But again, we're not going after them. We're going after each other. And I see that still being executed right now.
Yeah, and you made a very good point, in fact, in our first segment there, that maybe I should address too. This idea, or this prophecy that, for example, talking about bad aliens could be part of a control mechanism. You make people afraid of bad aliens, and therefore the idea is that, okay, there are bad aliens out there, therefore you now need to agree to these oppressive social measures to combat them,
Right.
Be very careful, because one thing I talk about in my book is that good ideas or valid ideas can be used for bad ends. You can give a valid idea a twist, and I especially talk about that in terms of spirituality. The fact that I think there's overwhelming evidence in the near-death studies that people have done, in some of the reincarnation studies that have been done, like this professor out in Virginia who spent most of his life just, compiling stories. To me, it all adds up to, there's a spiritual reality, and I think people have always felt that they've always identified with that since the beginning of human history. It's been a big part of what we do. But what happens is that good ideas or ideas that may be valid at their core are kind of given a twist, and that so we sort of intuitively latch onto the good part of the idea, but then somebody gives us a twist, like, okay, you're a soul, you're going to leave your body when you die, but if you want to go to this place called heaven, you better go shoot your neighbor. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So you have this core of an idea that seems to be valid, that seems to be supported by evidence, which is the survival of the consciousness, but then you have somebody out there giving it a bad twist. Now, if somebody does that with UFOs, or the idea of bad UFOs, which I'm in that camp, obviously, and there were a couple of times when I kind of saw people using my book, I thought towards ends or towards an agenda I didn't like.
Really?
And I did not want to be part of that. Not too often, though. I'm very pleased that it really hasn't been used much that way. I feel like it's been accepted the way I wanted it to. But if you find somebody promoting this idea, well, everybody who talks about bad aliens, that's just part of an agenda to bring in the New World Order, be a little bit careful about that, because, you can use that idea for a bad end, but that doesn't mean that the core idea is necessarily bad. For example, I would never say that, because the gods of Eden may be true, we therefore need to submit to 24-hour-a-day surveillance. I'm totally against that.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely against that. In fact, I was a conscientious objector. I got conscientious objector status during the Vietnam War. I've always been so opposed to war. And I still am, and that's what the book is about. So, and also I don't promote at all, a solution. What it was early when the book came out, people were saying, there has to be some armed rebellion against the aliens and all of that, and kind of against the people they control. And I'm totally against that idea. The solution to what I present the Gods of Eden is not to pick up a gun anywhere.
No, it's knowledge. It's information. That's never going to solve the problem.
Knowledge and information. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And getting to an understanding of the fundamentals of reality and all of that, I think it goes even deeper. Because that's what's been clouded from us in all of this. Is like, what is reality? The basic nature even of the universe and all that. That's what we kind of need to find out. And that to me is the solution. I kind of got off the track a little bit, and I apologize for that.
No, it's okay. We got plenty of time here.
Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of what I encourage people to do, and it's really hard in this field, like we talked about earlier, in the UFO field and all of these fields. There's so many little booby traps and so much stuff being put out there. You really have to tread very cautiously and really get hard-nosed about the evidence and really look at it. And then I think you'll do okay. Then I think you're in for a really interesting study, to say the least.
I agree. That's what I've always done. I've always taken a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and then gone and researched that and come to my own conclusions about things. And ultimately, I always find things that are just beyond even what I found on my own. Like I'd found my own research, I'd found my stuff, and then I start reading things in your work and start realizing that wow, this is I can prove with the things that I'm looking at, that the stuff that Mr. Bramley's talking about here is absolutely true and is going on right now. And those were great points that you mentioned there about, being very careful about stuff. Because I think the distinction that people are making between saying that, for a fact that these guys were going around making themselves gods, not just in one place, but all over the place, implying, put no other messiahs, no other gods before me, using the plural and all that. You really had this thing where, you had things that were just ripe to be exploited, and I think that this exploitation has continued today, and I think that's why there's been so much apprehension to the information, is because I think people they do want you looking in look over here, don't look over there, and there's definitely something hiding there that's more sinister, I think, than people are really paying attention to, and it's the fact that these people are right at our very doorsteps. And they're wanting us to do anything but wake up. One person wanted me to ask you if you had mentioned the Freemasons earlier. Have you ever been approached to join the Freemasons or anything else of that nature?
No, I haven't. I mean, I've been personally acquainted with people who said that they were Freemasons. Very nice people, very decent people, but they never asked me to join, and I never would join, even if they did ask me. Not because, I have to be a little bit careful. I have to kind of say, okay, if a person wants to be part of some kind of metaphysical or spiritual or religious group, I kind of am not in a position where I really should judge. I certainly have opinions, and I'm going to say them. But on the other hand, if somebody has a different opinion than me and they feel it's valuable to them and they feel it helps them, I'm not going to kind of get in their face about it. That's a decision they make. I mean, the book's out there. I'm willing to talk about it and express my ideas, but at the same time, but on the other hand, I'm not going to join either. And I'm kind of past the point where I feel like, maybe I'd want to join just to kind of see what their secrets are, Yeah,
I'm not a big joiner myself either.
Yeah, I'm not either. I've had some bad experiences from being a joiner in the past, in younger years. And so what I find is, it's valuable to draw. I kind of take the nugget approach. There are a lot of philosophies, a lot of things out there, kind of maybe what you talked about. And you're going to find in Masonic literature, especially their history literature, because
sure.
My book is actually based a lot on Masonic sources, but these are public sources. These are not secret sources.
Right.
These are just, Mackey, who wrote the big volume about Masonic history. It was very helpful to me, and it's in the book. And go ahead, and I tell people, just go ahead and draw from that. But as soon as you are asked to become part of something secret, especially if it's religious or fraternal or spiritual, you better really look with suspicion on that. I don't see any reason for secrecy when it comes to anything metaphysical or secret or religious anymore. And I can see how so much mischief can be done because of that, and how much mischief is done because of that. I've read books from the Rosicrucians, and some of that's also referenced in my book. But again, it's the history, and it's to discuss what their ideas were, at least as they publicly state them. I had a friend. I used to live not too far from a Rosicrucian center, and a friend read my book, The Gods of Eden, and used to joke with me, "Oh, I'll bet you're secretly running over to the Rosicrucians." and I think there was even a rumor started about that. I don't think he started. Those are good friends.
You can pay. I think you pay them like $800, and you get to be a member for a year or something like that. And anybody can do it online.
Like that.
I mean, it's hilarious.
Yeah. So anyway, it's fine. But on the other hand, I really caution people, even if it's to explore, even if it's to find out. Some people think, I want to be like this undercover investigator and kind of go in and find out what's really going on. Well, all right. If they really want to do that, go on. But I don't think it's necessary, really, to arrive at good information.
They make you take a blood oath and stuff like that. I don't think that's a very smart idea.
No, it's not.
I really have found in my research as well that the Freemasons have sort of been a red herring, because the knowledge that they had was absorbed into the Vatican no later than 1776 anyway. With the formation of the Bavarian Illuminati that came from the Los Alumbrado Society out of Spain. But all these, along the way, it didn't matter what group it was, as you mentioned earlier, it seems that every time something springs up out of the grassroots that's by the people, be it a political movement or a religious movement or anything else, but anything that springs up from the ground level of the people, it ultimately almost always gets infiltrated and then corrupted and turned into something else.
It does, and that's the tragedy. I mean, you look at, for example, what's happening right now in the Middle East with all of these uprisings. Now, I don't blame them for being tired of Gaddafi. I don't blame them for being tired of Mubarak. In a way, being a child of the late 60s, I kind of sympathize with that. And of course, you hope that they're going to get a true democracy and kind of get rid of the oppression. But on the other hand, what so often happens, and the Gods of Eden talked about that pattern, so often the other side is influenced by some of these same influences, and you find out that what you end up with really turns out not to be all that much better than what you started with, or that what you just overthrew. So, I mean, yeah, if you're going to be part of a movement like that, you just be very careful about your leaders and what the real agenda is, and really find out, because you might be disappointed, as I think some of the people in Egypt are. It sounds like the military is just pretty much running things now, and I'm not sure it's that much better than Mubarak was.
Oh yeah, but it's just complete chaos over there, no question.
Yeah, and maybe that chaos is the ultimate goal. Yeah, there's some people who may profit financially from it, and therefore may be involved in helping to instigate it. Then again, the king rat level that I talk about. But behind that, there may just simply be part of the agenda. Let's just keep people fighting.
I think that's definitely a big part of it as well. But I mean, my question I have is that the fact that the night before the revolution broke out, the Discovery Channel News published this article about how they had found 2 new chambers inside of the Great Pyramids that they did not previously know about, that they didn't know what function they served, and that they came from the time of Khufu. And then within a few days of the revolution breaking out, we hear about the antiquities being looted, and they happen to be from the same period of Khufu. So I see this direct connection between the wars, as you say, causing these things, keeping us just in perpetual chaos. But I also would see a connection to ancient antiquities, to ancient things that may explain just who these custodial masters are and what their plan is. And I think that's where the elite of today are getting their information from. I think they're continuing the plan that their masters set up long ago.
That's an interesting angle that I hadn't thought about, but you're right. You have the looting in Iraq, and like you talked about, the looting in Egypt. And it goes back to the Alexandrian Library, which a lot of people know about, and I talk about in my book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a huge looting. We lost an enormous amount of priceless, irreplaceable information. It basically was a blackout, of some of our earlier history. And again, the instigators behind that was this sort of apocalyptic Christian leader who, hey, this is all heresy, we need to go burn it down, kind of thing.
Yep.
And I think and then later on the Muslims, I think, were involved in that too. The radical element, like, hey, we got to make everything safe from Muhammad, kind of idea. So you find that radicalism behind that, and it does bring about, like you said, it brings about basically a wiping out of information about history that could maybe tell us more about our origins. Why are things the way they are? Because I think when you go back in ancient history, even to the extent that we have, you learn these things. Yeah, what do you do about it? You kind of wish to say, hey, everybody, just stop the shooting, stop the looting, and let's see what we can learn.
Well, I've gotten tired of that question too, Mr. Bramley. The 4 years I've been doing radio and stuff, because the flat answer that question. Okay, well, we have this information, so what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What's the solution? And my answer always is, if I had the solution, I wouldn't be talking about it. You wouldn't be writing books about it. I mean, if we had the solution, we'd be doing it. I think the fact of the matter is, we don't have all the information yet to formulate the proper solution, because we don't have all the facts.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and that is exactly it. I think we're searching for the information that we need to have the solution, but we don't. And a lot of people have been putting out ideas, and I think, throw them out there. I encourage people to throw them out there and let's talk about them, because you're going to find nuggets almost everywhere. And if we get enough of these nuggets, eventually we get that a pile of gold, so to speak, that gives us the solution that we're looking for. But you're right. I don't feel that I really have the solution at this point. I feel like hopefully I've presented a theory or a perspective that may offer some insights into what the problems are. But exactly how do you solve it? I don't know how to solve it. I know from a technical point of view, like we talked about, it's easy to solve the technical problems, but how do you solve the problem of of an agenda? And maybe it's an agenda that does not even come from this planet. I mean, as wild and goofy as that sounds, that may be where it's ultimately coming from.
I don't think that's wild and goofy, because I think that with you, when you look at the machine accuracy and how long this thing has been running, it had to have happened somewhere before it happened here. Especially when you look at things like Sumeria having a civilization literally overnight. I think that it was a blueprint that had worked somewhere else. These guys had known about this blueprint because they'd probably done it in other places, and that's why they were able to set it up here and keep it in secret and continue it for as long as they have.
Yeah, I kind of analogize our situation a little bit. For example, to let's say we're like the prisoners in a Nazi concentration camp, and if you're the prisoner in there, the people that you deal with, the Germans that you're dealing with, are the worst element of that society. They're the SS. They're the homicidal maniacs. The people who can do these really cruel, brutal things to other human beings. That's who you're That's who you're faced with very directly. But outside of there's this whole other country called Germany, and most of the people in that country were decent people, even back in World War II, just as they are now. But the trouble is, when you're the prisoner, you don't get to reach those people on the outside. The only people you get to reach and interact with are the prisoners, the guards, the wardens. And that makes it really tough. And so I kind of feel like, in terms of maybe what I've come up with, I've only seen the prison guards at this point. I've only seen the keepers. I don't know the civilization that they come from. And of course, there are all kinds of theories and a lot of things in the New Age about, they're serious and they're all wonderful people or whatever, But where's the evidence? And then how do you reach, if this is part of another civilization, like Charles Fort talks about, we're just property. We've just kind of got our local keepers here who are doing possibly these things. How do you reach the civilization that controls them to get them to stop? Because the way the concentration camps stopped is you stopped the country of Germany, right? It wasn't just that you had to stop their whole bigger machine to get the prison to stop. And I kind of maybe see an analogous situation here too on Earth, that if what I theorize is really happening, that somehow there has to be a reaching further out to get somebody else in a position who can stop it to stop it. So that I see as a problem. So that's why, I kind of tell people, even if the theory that I present is true, I don't necessarily have the solution because I don't have the total picture yet. No. This is only a much smaller part of a much bigger picture.
Well, I think the best thing is that it's at least, in the book, since it's been written, I think at least has gotten the ball rolling. And as you said, people like myself, I know a lot of others out there have sort of, taken it upon ourselves to kind of continue what, guys like you and others out that before had started. And we had to take a break, and we're going to come back. And we come back from the break, I want to get into, you mentioned this briefly, but I want to talk more on the enslavement of the soul being trapped into material matter and some of these things, the spiritual bondage and enslavement, and also the pushing of the apocalyptic religions. We'll talk more about this on the other side of the break with our guest, author and researcher William Bramley, here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Global Reality for you right here on the Global. All right, back here with you on the Global Reality right here on the Global Reality Radio Network. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Thank you for being with us here tonight for the broadcast. And boy, we got a good show going here tonight with our guest, William Bramley, author of the book, The Gods of Eden, which we've been reading here and we'll continue to read on the broadcast. And it's just a great honor and pleasure to have him on with us and to get his perspective. I really appreciate the fact that he's been somebody who, who has not, he wasn't somebody that ever made this the absolute only thing that he ever did, researching like some of us have. And, I think that he's gained a perspective in the years since he did this research now that it really just, to me, it just makes for good listening to hear him talk about this stuff, now the better part of 20 years after it was written. And I think that everything that's happened in the world since then, as I mentioned earlier, has probably strengthened his resolve about getting involved in this in the first place. So we're really lucky to have him on with us tonight. And I think I'm not really sure what his website is. It's williambramley.net or williambramley.com. I can't remember. I don't know if he has an actual functioning website, but we'll ask him. We'll bring him back up here in just 1 second. And also, please support our work at the website, theglobalreality.com. We have a chip-in banner there for the month for the bills. We also have a donate button there for anything else. If you want to help us with other amounts that go towards our work, that's how you do that. So we don't have commercials, and we don't have it's uncensored here. We can we say whatever we want, and say whatever words we want to use, and it's completely uncensored. So that comes as a result of our listening audience, and we don't try to get you to buy anything. So williambramley.com is his website. There you go. So we're going to bring him back up here now with us and continue on. What I wanted to talk about now was this idea that Mr. Bramley talked about earlier, about which we talk about here so much on the show, is this idea of keeping us from ever finding out that we are indeed spirits in the material world. We are indeed souls and entities that for somehow were through technology were entrapped here. And it seems that everything in society, I think that my conclusion, personal conclusion from my research for Mr. Bramley's question of, where does war, what is the reason for war, and why do we have to have it, or why do they tell us we have to have it? I think it is to keep us from ever finding out that they control this realm. For whatever reason, they control this 3 sense material realm, but they don't control the other realms of reality, the spiritual realms. And I think that's why there's been such a push towards, people like Ray Kurzweil and the transhumanists and trying to gain immortality through technology. I think that this goes back to these custodial masters. But I wanted to get your take, Mr. Bramley, and find out if you had seen in just things that have occurred and things as the technology is pushing forward. I mean, have you seen advances in technology that have made you believe this could be a part of these custodial masters' grand master plan?
And now, which technology is that? You mean life-extending technologies?
Well, I just mean, it could be that, but I just mean, the advances in technologies we've seen. What have there been specific things that maybe you have seen that you've said, okay, well, that right there is definitely a part of their grand agenda?
Well, mostly the biological engineering. That's what the ancient creation stories talk about. Creating a biological unit that will keep the soul attached to it.
Yes.
Because bodies need a consciousness in order to operate, and if a soul can just kind of come and go from the body whenever it wanted to, and it didn't like what was going on, it didn't want to be a slave, it would just leave, and that would be the end of the slave society. So that seemed to be a necessary element that you keep, at least according to the old creation stories, that you have to keep kind of the soul in a condition of being attached and not really being able to leave that easily. Certainly at death, the soul seems to leave and maybe perhaps get reborn in some cases. But that's so I would say, it's that biological technology is the only thing that I really see that might be a contributor to that.
Yeah, it's especially with the medical industrial society, the medical industrial complex becoming just as powerful as the military industrial complex through the healthcare system and through all this mandated stuff. So yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. I also was earlier you were talking about having to research these various secret societies, and I was just wondering if because what I've found is that especially with, as you mentioned, the Rosicrucians and in their symbol itself, the rosy cross with the rose on top of the cross, which of course represents the soul being crucified upon the body and trapped in the body. And that's one of the things that I've found in these secret societies, whether it be Rosicrucians or Freemasons or anything else. At the core of it, what it really is all about is about teaching the person and their soul how to transcend the death of the physical body by being able to ascend and not reincarnate back down here and be trapped on Earth. And this is something that as you talked about in the book, and go back to the Brotherhood of the Serpent, this was something that mankind was originally trying to be taught in secret, and then of course it got taken over and corrupted into being held within the hands of the elite. So I wanted to know if you'd come across that in your research into the secret societies, this idea of transcending that death.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to really be somewhat the core of this whole thing. Because what happened was that you look at the story of Adam and Eve, which is really just a symbolic story about the first humans and how they were engineered. The whole idea there was that there was basically a knowledge or an understanding that presumably people had, or early human beings had, about all of this stuff. And it wasn't kind of weird or mystical in any way. You didn't have to, walk around in weird robes and chant to a candle, It's just sort of something you understand the same way you understand that grass grows and you got to mow it when it gets too tall, kind of thing, at that practical level. But then what happened was that these efforts were made to sort of mystify it, to put it into these strange symbols, that all of a sudden this knowledge is not supposed to be easy to understand. It's supposed to be very weird, and nobody can have access to it unless they join this secret society, and then you have to interpret all these strange symbols. And I think that was sort of the death of spiritual knowledge. I think we probably, our very earliest ancestors had a greater understanding of all of that, but then it got mystified deliberately, basically to make us ignorant about it. Because as soon as you make true knowledge secret, and as soon as you say, oh, only the elite can have that knowledge, well, you're going to lose it. It's just basically going to get lost. And then the few people who do have access to it, it's easy to kind of make it even as it's taught secretly. You can put weird things in there that are just not true, and people will still believe it because they think it's some great secret, so it must be true. And so what I think appears to have happened, the whole goal, for example, you have the ancient Gnostics, you have some of the old systems of Asia, like around the time of Buddha, where they talked about the need for the soul to liberate, and in the Gnostic Gospels of Jesus, supposedly Jesus was a real Gnostic, and one of the things that he supposedly said was, it's so tragic that and I'm not quoting exactly here, but it's so tragic that something as great as the soul gets trapped in the poverty of the body. And so this idea has been around a long time, like this quest to kind of get back to a condition spiritually where you can kind of come and go whenever you want, and you no longer totally self-identify just with the body. But that progression, it's kind of been revived a little bit in the New Age movement. There's a lot of that, which I think is, in that respect, is positive. But the pressure then has been to sort of deny even that a soul exists. Now it's like, oh no, there's not even such a thing as a soul. It's just an illusion, and it's just a wishful thinking. When the body dies, it's the end. That's a very common belief. And so the movement in that direction, you kind of see a progression in history, how it's moved more and more and more in that direction. And surprisingly, the move started in these metaphysical organizations, some of them. It didn't really start with the hard sciences. Most people blame hard science for it, but it actually, before hard science came along, some of these did. Now, some of the groups wanted to promote the liberation of the soul, okay? But they weren't always successful, and the one mistake they made, and I think the history of Gnosticism is a good example of that, it was like having a good core idea and maybe a good core goal, but then it gets kind of twisted around. For example, you look at some of the Gnostics during Jesus' time. There were many branches of Gnosticism, by the way, with different kind of beliefs, and some of them really did teach nonsense, They taught things that just, they got involved in all kinds of ritual and things like that. So they kind of eroded true Gnosticism, which is just simply this path of liberation through knowledge, just through kind of getting back to, we just understand. Now, one reason why, and again, the creation stories talk about these ET gods being the source of this knowledge, or so the erosion of the knowledge, so that they had an agenda for that. What you find, for example, in the modern UFO abduction literature every now and again, and even in some really interesting Christian apocryphal writings about how these ET angels could actually seem to have a lot of control and understanding and mastery of this. All these stories about how they could actually get a soul to leave the body, go in a container, and go somewhere else, and kind of take it and move it. In fact, there's an abduction researcher named David Jacobs who had a story like that from one of his people that he interviewed. He didn't put much credence in it because he hadn't heard it very often. But as soon as I heard that story from him, it's like, okay, they have the understanding of this, and they use it, but they don't necessarily use it in a way that's beneficial to us, And one thing I caution people is that you can have more understanding about things. You could maybe have a better understanding of how reality works, how spirituality really works. But if you aren't guided by the right motives, you're not necessarily going to use that in the right way.
I have to say that's exactly what I found, Mr. Bramley, in my research into secret societies, because I was starting to research secret societies. I was going to make a film about it, and I ended up making these other 2 or 3 other films about it. I just got sidetracked. But one of the core things that I found was that, because I always heard, all the different rumors, Freemasonry and all these secret societies and the devil worship and all this stuff, and it's all for evil and it's evil things. Well, in none of my research, I could never find anything in any Freemasonic literature or Rosicrucian literature or anything else that said this is supposed to be used for evil. The information simply exists in whoever's hands it falls in. Depending upon that person's moral character, it's either going to be used for good or for evil. But as the custodians hijacked these things, they took it and made it where only their people would be in the chain of command. That way the information could inherently only be used for bad purposes. And I think that's what you're talking about here, is this idea of, like a gun. A gun by itself is not a bad thing, but a gun in the hand of a person with bad intentions. It's all about intent. And I think that's what they are trying to get us to do, is to constantly put negative intent and material, just very, very me type of stuff, selfish things, and manifest that into this, instead of, this idea that we can all unite as a people and we don't need a power structure over on top of us.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's exactly it. It's just we can have this knowledge and we can do something good with it, or we can do something bad with it. And I agree with you on the gun analogy. A gun is actually a fairly neutral thing. If you are living out in the wilderness and you need to eat, and you have a gun where you can shoot something and feed yourself and your family, a gun's a pretty good thing. But yeah, if you've got a gun, you're going to go out and rob a liquor store, that's a bad thing. So you're right. And I think spiritual knowledge is exactly the same way, that you can have it, but that doesn't mean you're going to use it well. But of course, so you have to change the motives. You have to change the motives of, and any technology is the same way, whether it's just a material technology or maybe even a spiritual knowledge. You have to use it the right way to get a good result from it. If you don't, you're going to get a bad result. Yeah.
I think that, I think it's definitely pushed in that direction for that to happen that way. You were talking about this idea of, I wanted to mention this, but you're on a roll, so I didn't want to interrupt you. But I want to go back and mention this idea of, you were talking about how teaching this and the different texts, teaching how to transcend the death of the body, and that of course goes back about 5,000 years to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and of course that's supposed to be read in front of a person's corpse over a period of days after the person has died, and it's supposed to facilitate the person, seeing past these distractions and these things that they're going to see in the spirit world that are, demons and things that are going to scare them into reincarnating back into a body. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about that. 5,000 years old, and now we see the oppression that we've seen with what's happened with China and Tibet. And I think that's, in my research at least, that's been why there has been that oppression, to keep those teachings from getting out to a wide amount of people. The idea that we can transcend this, and as you mentioned, the Gnostics and the search for knowledge. I mean, it's almost as if we need some sort of, neo-Gnostic revolution of the people, that's not controlled by the people anymore. We need a new revolution in understanding, I think, and in context.
Yeah, there is, I think, a growing movement in that direction. Most people call it the New Age movement or something akin to that.
And that has its own pitfalls too, though, as you mentioned.
Oh, sure. New Age, when you talk about New Age, it's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
They get into crystals and tarot cards and things that, frankly, I don't get into. Okay, but then, again, it's the nugget approach. You're going to find there that there are some good ideas, and there is some advancement. I mean,
some of that stuff is very valid. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for example, in recent years, I've seen, for example, Lynn McTaggart wrote a book called The Field. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. That's a pretty good book. It's a very interesting book, and she's out there kind of talking about it. It's about it kind of gets more into quantum physics a little bit, but it deals with the consciousness, and I feel that some of her work is pretty good. It's kind of in that direction. I kind of like a little bit of the she's a little bit slightly what you call new agey, but not a lot. She's a little bit of a hardcore journalist too, and I kind of like that combination. So
that's kind of like I am, yeah.
yeah, and she's kind of got some stuff going there too. There's a book that I saw a few years ago called I think it's called The Big Book of Near-Death Experiences, which is it's just sort of a compilation of all the research that people have done. So it's almost like a little encyclopedia. And now it's written by somebody who's sympathetic to the idea of people leaving the body. But there, she kind of covers a lot of the literature, both pro and con. She also talks about the people who think it's not real, and then addresses that too. And so, and again, I think that's a good read, because then you get kind of a good history, and you find out more about the research that's gone into it that kind of promotes the idea. A guy named Dr. Gary Schwartz, he wrote a book called the God Experiment or something like that, where he tested psychics. And it came up with some interesting results. Apparently, some of that seems to be real. Of course, you got plenty of fakes out there, but some of it seems to also be they're hitting far more than probability. And this guy's a professor and tries to use good science to test these things. So there's more of that out there, being published, and sometimes being published by the big publishing houses, so it gets out to a bigger audience. So I do see kind of a growing movement in that direction, and I think the more we've still got a problem with radical, militant, apocalyptic spirituality.
Yes.
Unfortunately, is still a problem. But even within those religions, like the three main monotheistic religions, you see that still a good majority really aren't too keen on that.
That's what I've seen. The whole research community sort of thing, that from the whole truth movement stuff and Alex Jones and the whole thing. I've sort of seen that sort of hijacked and drawn back towards this violent conflict, let's have an armed conflict type thing. And then a lot of these people that are on a lot of these shows and the Alex Jones shows have connections back to the Jesuit order and the Knights of Malta. I mean, I just see these things as, again, they're trying to hijack something that's of the people and steer it back towards their agenda for war.
Yeah, and avoid that. I mean, okay, there's definitely something to be known and learned about the Jesuits. Like I said, any kind of secret society that kind of acts in secret, it probably deserves looking into, and you're probably going to find things that aren't entirely positive in those things. And so, I mean, I kind of support it to that. People talk about 9/11. I think some of the evidence that there was something more to it, I think, is there, especially the collapse of Building 11. I mean, that's just kind of hard to reconcile, But on the other hand, maybe not every idea. But don't. You just kind of got to be careful what evidence you choose. And go carefully down that path. Yeah, for example, you look at one thing that kind of bothers me is I kind of see anti-Semitism kind of creeping into the conspiracy field.
Yes.
Okay, and that bothers me, and but it seems to happen all the time, and I don't know why this is. I talk about it a little bit in my book with the writings of a writer called Nesta Webster, who actually wrote some pretty good conspiracy books about almost a century ago. But then there was this whole thing about the evil Jews and even the evil Germans, and it was just over the top. I just oh my gosh, here's this good research that kind of seems to really that I found valuable, but then all of a sudden it kind of gets ruined by that.
All of that, Mr. Bramley, in my research it all goes back to the Vatican. It all goes back to the Jesuit order. They have used the Jews as their front men. They put them in charge of the banks. They put them in charge of multinational corporations, and they put out the protocols of the Elders of Zion as a front to anytime anybody started getting too close to the plan. Well, all of a sudden, what do we have? Well, we have Jews in the corporations and running the banks. So they're the red herring. And one of the things that really brought that to my attention and really made me understand that's how it was finding out that the Encyclopedia Judaica, which is this massive volume of books written for Jews, talks about the Rothschilds, and it says that the Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican's treasury. And that to me was sort of the proof that there you go. There had been constantly putting out this idea and fomenting this hatred towards Jews and Freemasons, but meanwhile you have this other whole control mechanism back here, and those bloodlines tied directly back to these custodians you talk about in your book. Every damn time we get onto something good, that happens, doesn't it? You guys ever notice that? I mean, this is, again, this is every time I've ever done an interview with a big guest. It's done this several times. One time it did it when I had Michael Tessarian on. Michael Tessarian was like, yeah, every time I'm on, it does that. It's unbelievable stuff. Man, oh man, oh man. Let me try to connect back here. It's always fun. Is it every time we have a guest on? See, this is they love messing with me. And now I got to go find his damn number again because it's being wonky. Can't you just tell me the last number I called? There we go. Yeah, call this one.
Hello?
All right, I think we got you back, Mr. Bramley.
Yeah. Technology is wonderful until it doesn't work, right?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it always seems to do this every time we start getting into serious stuff on the show. But
Let me make one point here too. Here's what I think: radical millennialist apocalyptic Judaism is definitely a factor in all of this. But so is radical millennial apocalyptic Islam, and so is the same with Christianity.
It's all controlled by the same forces.
They all definitely play a role in this, and they're all. But I caution people when I talk about this book. I say don't confuse the faction with the ultimate source, because all of these problems go back before there even was Judaism. They go back before there was Christianity. They go back before there was Islam. They go back to issues that were going on back then. And so what I see in them, I see factions, but not an ultimate source. And when you go all the way back to before any of them existed, that's where you get these weird alien gods that they say were coming down from the sky and creating these organizations. So you're going to find that in that kind of scheme, you're going to find kind of radical Judaism, radical Christianity, radical Islam, all useful for that purpose. But I don't think any three of those are the ultimate source of the problems that we have. I think they're just manifestations. They're factions that are useful for generating conflict.
Well, yeah, they absorbed them all under one roof, centuries ago, and so now since they control all of it, they pit one against the other for a period of time, and then, as you talk about in your book, you had things like the Reformation and all these things that happened on and on and on that seem to be a continuation of that, and it's just I think that people the whole thing of ignoring history and not missing out on what's happening today, I think is truer than it ever has been, because we see this again. We see everything executing the same as it always has, and the same people are running the show. I've just been dismayed to find these people, at the very heart of the research community, and people that have, because for years I always wondered why I never heard you on some certain people's shows and certain things of that nature. It seemed like your information was being relegated to some fringe, and then after reading it and getting into it, I find out, this makes a whole lot of sense to me now, why people don't want us looking at this, because as soon as you pull the face back on peel the onion back and start finding more and more of these revolutions all being associated with these custodial religions, it's not too long until you start to figure out that, hey, again, as you said, mankind is not the problem. It's the people that are running the show that are the problem, not us.
I think so. We certainly have the psychological capability of getting riled up. I mean, that's why it works. That's why an agenda like this would work, because we are capable of being violent. We are capable of getting all excited and being ignorant and doing stupid things. But that is what gives them the ability to kind of keep this agenda going. So, I mean, part of the solution is just to get people to, hey, calm down, It's just much easier said than done. And especially during times of difficulty, that's when people are more likely to get riled up and become more ignorant, more superstitious, and and more amenable then to being ensconced in this kind of agenda where they go out and do things that they normally wouldn't do. And so it all fits together. It's all like a glove. But how do you do that? And like I said, it's not easy. Part of the solution that I thought, okay, you just kind of got to change people on an individual basis. Much easier said than done. And what are you going to do in a time of real hardship or confronted with some enemy who might at some point be real? Well, you can't really expect them to say necessarily, oh, okay, well, hey, let's just have a talk. Having a talk doesn't always work. But that then creates the trap of, okay, let's pull out the gun, you see. And that's where it becomes so difficult. At some point, the Buddhists, I respect the Buddhists quite a bit. They have a philosophy of nonviolence. They believe that through meditation and achieving spirituality, that's the ultimate solution. And can we all be Buddhists in the real world? I don't know. If we could, that'd be great. Not necessarily Buddhists. I mean, I don't agree with every element. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. That kind of idea. So it's tough, And again, like we talked about earlier, I don't have the solution for how to make that happen. I think a lot of people would like to see that happen, and there's been plenty of talk about that's what we need to do. That's kind of what the 60s were about. At least that's how the 60s started. It was, okay, let's change ourselves. Let's talk about peace. Let's be peaceful in our way of living. And through that, we'll change the world. Well, the world did change a little bit because of the 60s. It did, I think, have some positive effect. I mean, it kind of eroded after a while. But those kinds of movements, I think, do have some beneficial effect. I mean, I think it kind of opened up. I think we're feeling some of the positive effects today through, this greater acceptance of alternative spirituality, which then opens the door to exploring more ideas about the soul and its connection to the body, things like that. And also just this idea of peace. Hey, don't pick up a gun. Find a peaceful solution. So, I'm not saying we should revive the 60s and get into our tie-dyes again, but if we can kind of start movements like that or kind of create that sort of environment again, I think that could be helpful.
Leaderless resistance,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but at the same time, we need, we need to look at what the bad sources are. I haven't given up on politics. I'm not a politician, by the way. I never will run for office. But you think, especially after reading a book like mine, and some of the things like this, say, God, what's the point of voting? Okay. Maybe it doesn't have the effect, as much of an effect as we would like, and I certainly agree with that point of view. And when you have all these other influences, I mean, the voting public is only half the power in Congress. The other half are the
lobbyists,
the financial interests, and all of that. I mean, but still, it's at one point anyway. The politicians do have to, at least marginally, at least until they completely fake the voting machines, but until then, the vote has some influence. So keep voting, and if you don't like who's in the two parties, vote for somebody else or write somebody in. People say, well, you're wasting your vote. I'm kind of one of those people who votes for these little marginal third-party candidates, and but I said, but my point is, okay, just vote for who you think would really be the best president, whether you think they could win or not. Eventually, it has some impact. It may not be the impact you wish it would have. You despair that, hey, everybody's voting just Republican or Democrat, and what difference is there? Which, there's some truth to that, but participate in it and participate in local politics and things like that.
I sort of have to disagree with that, because I don't know. I just, for me, I've seen that. I think that perpetuating the system by going and voting and just putting anybody's name, writing in Donald Duck or anything else of that nature, and just voting for whoever or whatever you think the lesser of the two evils is. To me, I think that's dangerous as well, because I think you fall into a trap where, regardless of whether you're voting for puppet number 1 or puppet number 2 or puppet number 3, whatever it may be, you are still validating to them that their system that they have put down upon us, that these custodial masters had put down on us long ago, is still a valid system that we want to participate in and be a part of. And I think that non-participation in the system altogether, to me, seems like a more viable idea than just going and writing in somebody else's name. But we may differ on that point.
It'd be more like I agree. Don't vote for the lesser of two evils. If you think there's an evil there, don't vote for them. And if that means not voting at all, absolutely. I have to agree with you totally. But let's say there is some marginal third-party candidate, and you think, I kind of agree with most of what this person is saying. I kind of think I'm not sure. I'm not so worried that maybe they're part of the Democrats or the Republicans. I'd say, go ahead and vote for them. But on the other hand, if there's nobody, and when I say write in, I don't mean Donald Duck. I mean somebody that you really want to see as president. You might be the only person to write it in. But at the same time, it's out there. You sort of put it out there. And so that's why I think that. But yeah, if you're looking at a ballot and it's nothing but these evils on there, you don't vote for the lesser thing. Yeah, I agree with you. Don't vote at all.
Yeah, well, I'm torn on it too, though, because for me that's always been the way that I've seen it is non-participation system. But I do see the other end that you're saying about it too is the fact that you do sort of have to let them know that no matter what your voice is saying, that you still do have a voice, regardless of whether or not it's agreeing with puppet number one or puppet number two that they're trying to give you a choice from. I see your point where, you still have to try in some way, shape, or form to exercise that voice and to say, hey, look, I am here and I'm not going to be forgotten about.
Yeah, but don't vote for somebody you think is a puppet. I'm unlikely to vote for Democrat or Republican in next year myself. I don't see anybody coming up who's very appealing to me. On the other hand, let's say there's somebody who is running or isn't even running, but maybe I think, this person would make a good president. Maybe it's my next door neighbor. Okay. I'll write that in there. And because, when you put something out into the world, it doesn't necessarily have, there's the story about the butterfly that flaps its wings in California and it creates a tsunami, and well, I shouldn't talk about tsunamis in Japan right now, but you know that story. I guess it's that bigger things can start with very, very small expressions, very small things like that. So that's what I'm saying is just kind of put out there what you or who you really think should be there. And that may not be a person on the ballot or maybe a minority candidate. But yeah, I agree with you. Do not vote for do not choose between puppets.
I just, it's just so difficult that they put us in these positions where we have to be that sort of premeditated about this stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, we really are. If you're not informed about the system and informed about how it works, then somebody is going to, you're an easy mark. Someone's going to pull one over on you. But again, it's a fine line of towing the line between being informed and trying to stay somewhat within the system and also without it. I think that non-reliance upon them and their power and their energy and their food and everything else, I think is once they started locking everything behind closed doors and saying you have to be in indentured servitude to me to be able to just survive, as you mentioned earlier. If people are trying to have to worry about putting food on the table, they're not going to give, they're not going to give a rat's behind whether or not bombs blew up the World Trade Centers or whether or not there's extraterrestrials out there or anything else. They're just worried about putting food on the table and having a place to live. I think that's been the big thing and how they've enabled us to do this, especially with television and the whole programming with that as well. Yeah.
As long as you can keep that threat alive, you can keep people subservient.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it. And so they'll offer a solution which are usually often not very good. The solutions to the economic problems. I haven't heard one good solution come out of Congress or out of any of the politicians. To me, the solutions are in a different direction. Very simple. They could certainly be enacted legislatively, but nothing even approaching, I think, a solution that addresses the fundamental problem. Now they're talking about, okay, well, we want a global currency under the IMF. Well, wait a minute. The IMF has been a big part of what's wrong. It doesn't solve anything. And the IMF is part of the system that creates this inflatable money. And how's it going to solve anything? It won't. So you can have a lot of currencies, and every country can still have its own currency. But it can be set up so that it's going to be very stable, and so we don't have to worry about this kind of thing anymore. That's what you need to do. Not just use the same system, but on a bigger monolithic scale. That's not going to change anything. So so we are constantly being offered bad solutions when, to me, the simple, at least to me, obvious solutions just aren't even talked about, and it's very disappointing. You don't see any of these Congress people. They want to go back to the gold standard. Some people, most people don't. And I point out, well, wait a minute, I'm going to make all your gold fans angry here, but anyway.
No, we don't. No. We don't tell our fans to buy gold here. We don't have. We don't tell our fans to buy gold.
All right.
We're not on that team.
Yeah. Okay. But the gold standard was the start of inflatable money. I mean, the gold standard started the whole thing because you have a certain amount of gold, but then you issue notes way in excess of the gold you have, and they had collapses even when there was a gold standard. Economic collapses of this kind happened even with a gold standard. So that's not the solution. You can create a stable monetary system that reflects production and all of that. That's very stable, and you don't necessarily just have to base it on one commodity. In fact, in this modern world, it's probably not smart to do that. But nobody's proposing that. They're just proposing all these other things, and that's kind of the problem. The solution to the problem, in Libya is, okay, let's go and throw more bombs on the situation. Let's go drop more bombs on it. Well, it's stupid. And so the solutions that are being offered for all these things just don't work, and they just kind of perpetuate the problem. How do you solve that? I say just keep putting it out there. People who have better solutions, just keep throwing them out there. It gets frustrating. It gets aggravating. A person like that may die of old age before they see it enacted. But sometimes an idea can take 100 years to take hold. And if there is a real shift in consciousness, if it really does happen, then suddenly those seeds that got planted a long time ago could sprout. Or maybe not. I don't know, but it won't sprout unless people try.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is we just have to try, and nobody's going to always get it right all the time. But I think just pushing forward and having some sort of motion, and instead of not doing anything at all, I think is going to be the best thing to do. Well, we're out of time, folks. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank Mr. Bramley for coming on with us tonight. Is there anything you want to tell the listeners as far as anything new you might be working on, or what else you're doing now in your life besides researching and writing books?
Well, no, that's about it. I'm kind of happily retired. I'm not really trying to plug the book that much. I wrote another book called Jesus Goes to Hollywood.
Yes.
It just has, not a very popular book. I hate to say, not as popular as The Gods of Eden. That's fine, but that just gets into all the different theories about Jesus, where I don't really have an opinion about anything. I just kind of present them. It kind of arose out of The Gods of Eden, mainly because I started running into all these different theories, and I thought it'd just be interesting to kind of put together a book, one theory in each chapter, and just kind of present them. Some of them are very, very radical and kind of shocking in some ways.
Well, maybe we can have you back on after I read that book as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. But anyway, I enjoyed it, Josh, and I think you're on the right track, and I'm glad your listeners are there, and just keep plugging at it. That's about all I can say.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on with us tonight, Mr. Bramley. You take care of yourself.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
All right, there he goes. William Bramley joined us tonight here for the broadcast. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And, it was a lot of fun. I thought he was a really good guest, and I liked his perspective on a lot of stuff. And hopefully, this will push forward people's own ideas and everything else from this interview. It's always good. I always enjoy doing interviews. They always seem to be big bombshell shows. I couldn't be on with Lee last night. My voice, you guys remember last week I was, if you were listening, I was psychically attacked on air. I don't know. Something weird was going on with my voice last night. So we're going to try to give it a rest, and because I've been doing too much stuff. So that's why I wasn't live last night. But anyway, please support our work at the website, theglobalreality.com. The chip-in banner's there. So we can meet that goal of the month to pay the bills. And then the donate button is there for other amounts, and you can make a recurring donation amount as well. My name is Josh Reeves. I love each and every one of you. You guys have a great night. Take care.